For thousands of years, humanity has been fascinated by the idea of abilities that seem impossible. Moving objects, reading other people's minds, seeing the future. At the dawn of civilization, occult tasks were handled by shamans, priests, and oracles. And in our modern times, at the height of the Cold War, interest in the paranormal reached the highest levels of government. Secret organizations saw this as a potential superweapon. A real arms race in the supernatural began between the Soviet Union and the United States. In our country, scientific teams under the control of the KGB developed methods for scanning the past, created technologies for covert manipulation, and even for controlling the climate. They spared no expense on these programs. In this major documentary film, you will see how psychics were selected and used in Soviet power structures such as the KGB, the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and the Army. What stages of development did it go through? The science of psychophysical phenomena? How the phenomenon of Ninel Kulagina, which was then called the K phenomenon, was studied for 20 years by more than 40 Soviet and foreign scientists, including 2 Nobel laureates. Make yourself comfortable to immerse yourself in the world of parapsychological research, from academic laboratories to secret agencies that searched for the key to unprecedented power in the human mind. The question of paraphenomenal abilities has interested humanity at all times. It is usually believed that only a very small, gifted part of the population possesses such abilities, but it's not just the gifted. Each of us may have experienced that strange feeling when someone calls, just as you were about to call them yourself, or even just thought about them. And in general, almost everyone can recall different moments in life that could be called supernatural experiences. However, there are no adequate explanations for the nature of all these phenomena that fit within the modern scientific paradigm. Today, most scientists simply deny these phenomena, since there is no force that could explain them. And those who try to study such phenomena are usually labeled as part of an unofficial army of weirdos in tinfoil hats. But it wasn't always like this. In the early 16th century, Paracelsus was the first in European literature to describe in detail the psychophysical abilities and related potential capabilities of humans. The human mind is a microcosm, a part and an expression of the universal mind. A person can communicate his thoughts to another person he sympathizes with at any distance, or influence the soul of another person in such a way as to affect his actions. And already in the middle of the century, the Roman Catholic Church commissioned Prospero Lambertini, who later became Pope Benedict, to conduct a scientific investigation into reports of psychic phenomena. His conclusions turned out to be unexpectedly far from orthodox within the Church. As he stated that one, psychic experiences are not necessarily manifestations of God or miracles. They can be experienced by fools, idiots, melancholics, or animals. Second, these visions have no direct relation to either saints or demonic beings. Third, prophecies are more often made in dreams than in waking life. Fourth, it is difficult for the prophet to distinguish his own thoughts from extrasensory messages. Fifth, predictions often take a symbolic form. In his conclusions, Lambertini to some extent anticipated the modern view on these issues. Well, full-fledged scientific efforts to establish the existence and explain psychophysical phenomena began not so long ago. A little over a century ago, as a result of the founding of the Society for Psychical Research in London in 1882. For the first time, reports on controlled experiments in telepathy and clairvoyance began to be published in the works of this society. 3 years later, in the United States, in Boston, several prominent scientists and philosophers founded a similar American Society for Psychical Research. Due to financial difficulties, it soon merged with the British group. However, in 1905, it separated from it, forming its own organization with its own journal. The Society for Psychical Research managed to attract well-known scientists and specialists from widely recognized fields of knowledge to participate in its work. Among the Society's residents were 3 Nobel laureates, 10 members of the Royal Society, 1 Prime Minister, as well as many physicists and philosophers, including Henry Sedgwick, Frederick Myers, Rayleigh, Lord Rayleigh, Sir Joseph John Thomson, William McDougall, Edmund Gurney, Sir William Crookes, Sir William Barrett, Henry Bergson, the Duke of Balfour, Arthur Gardner Murphy, George Nugent, Merle Tyrrell, Charles Richet, and Gilbert Murphy. A special place is held by William James, a psychologist and philosopher from Harvard, one of the founders of the American Society. He insisted that psychophysical phenomena should be studied objectively, with scientific rigor and without bias. Anyone who has a sound sense of perceiving facts, not dulled by the systematic influence of scientific sectarianism, should, it seems to me, feel that exalted sensitivity and memory of visions correspond to reality. Haunted houses, trance states accompanied by supernormal abilities, and even experiments in thought transmission are natural varieties of phenomena that, just like other natural events, should become the subject of inquisitive scientific thought. At the beginning of the century, the first organized studies of psychophysical phenomena also began to be conducted in scientific institutions. Among the most notable of these were the studies conducted at Stanford University. They became possible thanks to Thomas Stanford, the brother of the university's founder, who provided financial support for this work and bequeathed funds for its continuation. To this day, the university awards a scholarship for work on the topic of psychophysical research. However, real scientific research in this field at a university level only began in the late 1920s at Duke University. James's successor at Harvard, William McDougall, after taking the chair of psychology, assigned the Rhines to study to what extent the field known as psychophysical research could claim scientific significance. The Rhines' preliminary experiments gradually led to the creation of laboratories where, under controlled conditions, they began to study phenomena that became known as extrasensory perception. For the first time, scientists suggested that PSI abilities are widespread and may possibly be inherent in all people without exception. In 1937, the Rhines began publishing a journal on parapsychology, which remains the leading journal in this field to this day. In 1957, a professional organization was founded, which its creators called the Parapsychological Association. In 1969, it became a division of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. It is also worth mentioning the serious research in the field of parapsychology conducted by Professor Robert Jahn of Princeton University. Robert Jahn, a widely recognized authority in the field of rocket engines, retrained as a researcher of paranormal phenomena. It was with his 1982 work, The Persistent Paradox of Psychophysical Phenomena, an engineering perspective, that paranormal phenomena began to be called psychophysical phenomena. This term made it possible to significantly reduce the level of rejection of parapsychological research and greatly ease the lives of paranormal researchers. It is also worth noting the research at the Stanford Research Institute by Professors Putgoff and Targ, conducted in the United States in the 1970s and 1990s. Russell Targ had a Bachelor of Science degree, studied at the Physics Department of Columbia University, but did not pursue a higher degree. He worked together with Gordon Gould, one of the first creators of the laser, and was the author and co-author of a large number of books on extrasensory perception. Harold Puthoff received his doctorate in electrical engineering from Stanford University in 1967. In 1969, he published a book co-authored with Richard Pantel called Fundamentals of Quantum Electronics. In the United States, there has been a Committee for Scientific Investigation and Evaluation of Reports on Paranormal Events and Phenomena for many years. The main task of this organization is the scientific analysis of reports. It publishes its findings in its own journal, Skeptical Inquirer. Currently, there are several journals in English that are specifically dedicated to this field. About 20 universities and colleges in the United States publish reports on research in this field. And over the past 4 decades, Several master's and doctoral theses have been defended at reputable universities in Western Europe. And now, let's take a look at how this topic has developed in our country. In 1885, an experimental psychological laboratory was established in the Russian Empire under the leadership of the well-known scientist and psychiatrist Bekhterev, who was the founder and head of the Psychoneurological Institute and the Institute for the Study of the Brain and Mental Activity. Since 1922, in the second of these institutions, systematic work was carried out to study telepathy, and for this purpose, a commission was established to study mental suggestion. The great scientist brought together a rather diverse team because he believed that working with people of all viewpoints was productive. Psychologist and neurophysiologist Leonid Vasiliev wrote, "The main feature of this commission was that it included both representatives of science and adepts of occultism, spiritists, theosophists, and occultists." But of course, the main focus was on the scientists. From 1922 to 1937, in the practical laboratory of zoo psychology, at the Durov corner of the main directorate of scientific institutions of the People's Commissariat for Education, the mechanism of telepathy was studied. The effects of telepathy were studied both with dogs and with people. It was from Durova's corner that all Soviet experimental parapsychology began. A scientific council would gather right in Vladimir Durov's apartment. According to Chizhevsky's recollections, the reports at the Scientific Council of the laboratory, thanks to their uniqueness and originality, attracted the attention of many scientists and natural science enthusiasts who would come to listen to them or present their own bold and original reports. Unusual experiments were encouraged in the laboratory, where freedom and, at the same time, rigor of thought and opinion prevailed, where scientific routine and old-fashioned ways of scientific thinking were completely disregarded. All of this was interesting, new, and attracted many scientists. By order of the People's Commissariat of Defense, from 1932 to 1937, the Leningrad Bekhterev Brain Institute conducted experimental research on telepathy. The project was led by Leonid Leonidovich Vasiliev, who had previously worked with Bekhterev. After the death of his mentor in 1927, Vasiliev worked on parapsychological topics independently. In the project for the military, they studied the mental suggestion of motor acts, visual images, and sensations. Continuing his work, Vasiliev founded a parapsychology laboratory at Leningrad State University in 1960. Interestingly, it was only years later that Vasiliev learned that in the 1940s, the biophysics laboratory of the Academy of Sciences in Moscow had received a similar order. In other words, the People's Commissariat of Defense ensured itself with a double-blind state order. At that time, not only scientists were engaged in parapsychological research. From 1921 to 1937, within the structure of the VCHK and Joint State Political Directorate People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs, there was a special department, which was later renamed the 9th Department of the Main Directorate of State Security of the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs. It included a laboratory that worked, among other things, with parapsychological phenomena. The chronology of interest from classified government agencies in paranormal phenomena did not end there, but we will return to it in detail and thoroughly in a separate part of this film. Now, let's move to 1969, when the Secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Demichev, established a commission to investigate parapsychological phenomena. The commission's conclusions stated, "Some phenomena considered in parapsychology apparently do take place." Well, starting from the 1960s, the name Ninel Sergeyevna Kulagina began to appear in the Soviet press. Astonishing scientists with her pronounced talent in psychokinesis, telepathy, and clairvoyance, the Ninel Kulagina phenomenon was studied for 20 years. Just imagine, not 2 years, or even 5 years, but 2 decades. Those who claim that Ninel Kulagina was a fraud will have to rack their brains over how she supposedly deceived complex scientific instruments and the most advanced scientific community of the 1960s and 1980s for 20 years. At the same time, the people working in Soviet institutes were not religious folks who believed in miracles, but true skeptic materialists, the most hardened atheists of their time. Kulagina was studied by 40 domestic and foreign scientists, including 2 Nobel laureates. After the telekinesis sessions, she felt physically and morally drained, with headaches that could end in vomiting. There are known cases when the woman even fainted. During the Great Patriotic War, Kulagina received combat wounds in the intestinal area. After 5 surgeries on this organ, the doctors had to admit that because of the adhesions, they had no right to operate on her anymore. Then she tried the method of autogenic training, where pain in the problematic organ is turned off by the power of thought. During the session, Ninel Sergeyevna discovered that she had given herself a first-degree burn. Her attending physician, Georgy Belyaev, documented this. A medical board was assembled and concluded that Ninel Kulagina could raise her skin temperature to the point of a burn using only the power of thought. Since the late 1960s, in addition to the abilities listed here, she was also credited with dispersing a laser beam with her hands, rotating a compass needle, exposing photographic film placed in a sealed bag, and changing the acidity of water. Here, for example, is the original protocol of an experiment conducted on February 8, 1978, in the apartment of academician Isaac Kikoin. There are signatures of 9 people under the protocol, all of whom are professors and scientists. We also confirmed that when Kulagina placed her hand on the subject's skin, after about a minute, it caused a strong burning sensation. It was like the sensation from a mustard plaster or a hot object, followed by redness, similar to a first-degree burn. In Kulagina's experiments, what is demonstrated is not a trick, but a phenomenon of nature that is currently unexplained, and studying it is of great interest to science. A laboratory was established in Moscow under the Academy of Sciences. Professor Yuri Gulyaev led a group studying human extrasensory abilities. Gulyaev's signature is also present in the experiment protocol that was just shown. Based on the researchers' work, an official scientific justification was provided. Academician Yuri Borisovich Kobzarev, a scientist in the field of radio engineering and radiophysics, one of the founders of radar in the Soviet Union, gave Kulagina a written document certified with the Institute's seal where he worked. Here it is. In particular, it says here, "I confirm that Ninel Sergeyevna Kulagina possesses an extraordinary ability to cause the movement of light objects without touching them, and that she does this solely by straining her body. This cannot be explained by the emergence of electric or magnetic fields." But his colleague, academician Yuri Gulyaev, did not agree with Kobzarev's opinion and tried to explain the movement of objects by an electric static field. Here is what academician Yuri Kobzarev recalled in court in defense of Kulagina regarding her supernatural abilities. "Once, I had a severe case of cervical radiculitis. She put her hands on me, and I felt an incredibly strong sensation, almost like burning. If you look at Kulagina's hand through a light filter, you can detect a powerful stream of light coming from her hand. As a rule, a person does not glow with such brightness as, for example, her hand does when she is concentrating. Soviet scientists observed a strong electric field around her hands, and a sensitive microphone placed nearby recorded short ultrasonic pulses. It was also noted that during telekinesis sessions, her hands would sweat heavily, sometimes to the point that sweat would drip from them. The ability of Ninel Sergeyevna to heal is confirmed by the outstanding surgeon Felix Vladimirovich Balyuzek. Here are his words. Her abilities concern inflammatory, vascular, and tumor diseases. We turned to her in the most desperate cases, when the question of amputation arose because the leg was already lost. But nevertheless, in some way that we don't understand, she is able to restore the patency of blood vessels. And everything turns out fine afterwards. During the experiments, Kulagina's blood pressure rises higher than our instruments can measure. Her pulse and blood sugar level increase dramatically. A study at the clinic, conducted by a group of doctors led by Professor Doctor of Medical Sciences Felix Belyuzek, briefly describes the phenomenon as follows. This is a quote from a document signed by this professor. March 31, 1988. The intensity of the reactions during the heating of the skin was easily controlled by Kulagina, up to the formation of blisters and other clear signs of second and third degree burns. In most cases, such burns resembled the shape of the palm and fingers of her hand, even when the skin was not in any contact with the patient's skin. Direct thermometry and thermography made it possible to prove that the burns could not be considered thermal. Experiments were also conducted in the laboratory to transmit the burning sensation through an object. Even a metal screen was not an obstacle. The burning sensation was transmitted even when Kulagina's hand and the subject's hand were in water. Sometimes holes appeared in clothing, for example, in underwear made of acetate silk, but there was no skin infection. The experimenter did not feel the burning sensation transmitted by Ninel Kulagina only when a copper screen was used. Here is another scientist, Dulnev Gennady Nikolaevich, professor, Doctor of Technical Sciences, from 1974 to 1986. He was a professor at the Department of Computer Thermophysics and Energy Physical Monitoring, and headed the Center for Energy Information Technologies. He recalled in 2005 that during another experiment on an object, in this case a wine glass, it jumped up and started crawling across the table in small steps. "We caught it at the other end of the table," the professor noted. "The wine glass crawled about half a meter, jumping along the way." There were quite a few people who tried to debunk the phenomenon of Ninel Kulagina. One of the last, the Russian journalist Boris Sobolev, in his film Those Who Go to Hell, says that Ninel Kulagina actually did not fight in the war, and that the combat award she had was allegedly stolen from a veteran. However, it's easy to check whether she actually has any award at all. Kulagina, Ninel Sergeyevna, Order of the Patriotic War, 2nd Class, Award Document Number 80. With the rise to power of Mikhail Gorbachev, the government's policy towards people like Kulagina changed. The laboratory at the Academy of Sciences was closed. The Ministry of Justice's journal, Man and Law, accused Kulagina of charlatanism in a sharply derogatory manner. Usually, fraudsters use their gift for personal gain, but in the case of Ninel Sergeyevna, this was not observed. Kulagina filed a defamation lawsuit against the editorial staff of this journal, and she won. Imagine, in 1987, the Journal of the Ministry of Justice under Soviet rule loses a defamation case in court, a unique case in Soviet history. But there was little joy in that. She was diagnosed with brain cancer. On top of that, due to constant nervous stress, she suffered a third heart attack. In 1990, at the age of 64, she passed away. After censorship was lifted in 1989, research into parapsychological issues expanded greatly. In the same year, the State Committee for Inventions and Discoveries, for the first time in its long history, issued a copyright certificate for an unconventional healing method by the famous Junia Davidashvili. In the following years, many organizations appeared. The Scientific Committee on Bioenergy Informatics, headed by academician Kaznechev, the Center for Psychotronics and Folk Healing, the Vasilyev Parapsychology Foundation, the International Public Scientific Committee on Human Ecology and Energy Informatics, headed by Professor Volchenko, the Academy of Energy Informational Sciences, the Interdepartmental Scientific and Technical Center, VENT, now the International Institute of Theoretical and Applied Physics, of the Russian Academy of Natural Sciences. In 1994, at the St. Petersburg State Institute of Precision Mechanics and Optics, Professor Dulnev established the Center for Energy Informational Technologies. Gennady Nikolaevich Dulnev dedicated several decades of his life to studying issues related to the paraphenomenal abilities of humans and, as already mentioned, also researched the phenomenon of Ninel Kulagina. In 1998, based on many years of research into paraphenomenology and extensive practical applied work, Vladimir Viktorovich Tonkov established the Institute of Biosensory Psychology in St. Petersburg, which still exists to this day. In the early 2000s, the Institute set the task of creating a situation that would convincingly prove the existence of a material component of our psyche, capable of influencing physical objects and subjects, as well as proving that this ability is not unique, but inherent in every person. During the very first year of this experiment, All participants in the annual training group at the Institute of Biosensory Psychology, under the guidance of Tonkov, without exception, learned to move objects weighing from a few grams up to 100 grams without physical contact. It should be noted here that none of the participants in this group were pre-selected based on any criteria. Thus, the first step was taken to prove that there is no special selection or predisposition required to learn how to move objects without physical contact. This is an ability that every person has. Furthermore, over the course of several years, this conclusion was confirmed. During this time, several thousand people studied at the Institute, 99% of whom were trained in telekinesis skills. Within the Institute, an effective system was developed that allows almost anyone, including untrained individuals, to be taught the basic skills of contactless object movement within 5 to 30 minutes. The result of this work was recognized in the Russian Book of Records and Achievements in the fall of 2008 as a world record in the category of largest community of people, trained in telekinesis skills in the shortest possible time. Physicists, medical psychologists and psychiatrists, chemists, and other specialists from different countries around the world took part in the years-long experiment. Most of them left the study as experienced operators, surprising their friends and colleagues. From 2008 to 2011, under the guidance of Dulnev, a series of experiments were conducted at the Institute of Biosensory Psychology to provide evidence for and repeatedly demonstrate contactless movement of objects. During these experiments, it was shown that the ability to produce the effect of telekinesis is inherent in everyone without exception. The induced effect is targeted and controllable. A person's psychic abilities are material, have a wide range of influence, can be trained, and serve as a link between the person and the surrounding world. The results obtained prove that human beings possess a vast resource of qualities that are hidden and untapped. Moreover, the question of the existence in every person of a special entity, usually referred to as the soul, receives not just a practical answer, but also greatly expands our understanding of the human being, creating an entire new step in the ladder of human knowledge. But now let's continue to study the chronology of government agencies' interest in paranormal abilities. In fact, this interest within closed departments has never faded. After all, who else but the security agencies should study weapons that provide super advantages? In the 1980s and 1990s, the government began to create new laboratories and allocate significant funds, which was connected to the intensification of the arms race between the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics and the United States of America in the field of the supernatural. Major General of the KGB, Nikolai Alexeyevich Sham, writes that in the 1980s, these approaches in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics were increasingly used towards the creation of psychotronic weapons, based on numerous studies that were conducted in our research institutes. Some of these developments might seem completely unbelievable to an uninitiated person, as if taken straight from a science fiction novel. Under the control of the KGB, scientific teams developed methods for scanning the past using regressive hypnosis, created technologies for covertly manipulating the leaders of countries and enemy personnel, technologies for controlling the climate in specific regions of the planet, extracting information from military satellites by sending a human phantom into space, and much more. However, despite numerous but scattered projects researching supernatural phenomena, until the late 80s, there was no unified, state-level, comprehensive parapsychological program. In 1987, the Council of Ministers of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics received a package of documents under the general title on the necessity of using bioenergetic methods in the interests of the national economy and defense of the country, prepared by Lieutenant General Kantseverov, the head of the Center for Space Probing. The country's leadership was offered to use parapsychological developments in industry, military remote control systems, as well as for ensuring social control and maintaining law and order. Chairman of the Council of Ministers Ryzhkov sent the project for review to the State Committee for Science and Technology and the Academy of Sciences. However, the project was not accepted due to the negative position of the academicians. But the process did not stand still. KGB officers collected information about amateur scientists, psychics, astrologers, magicians, and witches. Over time, officers began involving unconventional experts in their operational activities. For example, the psychic from Rostov-on-Don, Kustov, helped operatives solve the murder of the chief designer of the Medium Machine Building Design Bureau and the chief engineer of the Astrophysics Research and Production Association. According to Major General of the KGB, Shama, Kustov worked for the central apparatus of the KGB. The materials on many of the projects he was involved in are still classified to this day. In addition to solving crimes and providing treatment, Valery Kustov, at the request of the KGB, identified spies and pointed out people engaged in sabotage activities. Major General Rogozin wrote in his memoirs about the KGB's operational cooperation with the famous astrologer and psychic Vronsky, who taught officers the basics of astrology. For the method of obtaining information about remote objects, operatives cooperated with psychics Safonov and Dodyshev. As a result, the idea of legitimizing parapsychology in the work of special services took shape. In September 1991, Xiao A.M. was appointed deputy chairman of the KGB. Being an enthusiast of unconventional technologies, he immediately set the task of identifying everything that was being done in the country in the field of parapsychology. Colonel Shadrin, who headed the department of the 2nd Main Directorate, later the Counterintelligence Directorate, was appointed responsible for the PSI project. According to Shama, a lot of work was done, and by the end of 1991, we developed a powerful program with a unified ideology, which included dozens of topics under development. In the field of extraordinary technologies and extrasensory perception, which I personally supervised, all work on extrasensory perception and unconventional unique technologies was systematized. Ultimately, this work was supposed to reach the highest state level and acquire the status of a national program. However, General Sham did not have time to finish the job. The collapse of the Soviet Union and the reorganization of the special services prevented him from doing so. The new leadership was not interested in parapsychological projects. Meanwhile, Sham's efforts were not in vain. With his direct involvement, parapsychological services were established in the Ministry of Internal Affairs, the Ministry of Defense, and the Security Service of the President of the Russian Federation. Each of them had a different fate. The Special Center of the Ministry of Internal Affairs was established in 1989 at the initiative of Minister of Internal Affairs Bokatin. It was headed by Doctor of Medical Sciences, Colonel of the Internal Service Vyacheslav Mikhailovich Zvonikov. A year later, 150 people were working at this center, 15 of whom were part of the so-called First Department, which dealt exclusively with extrasensory perception. A large program was created for the new center, involving more than 100 institutes and laboratories. The center's specialists tested police officers, selecting those with extrasensory abilities. At the same time, they used tests for telepathy, clairvoyance, and telekinesis. The Ministry of Internal Affairs psychics were involved in searching for criminals, while laboratories studied the phenomenon of remote interaction between people and non-contact influence of one person on another. The center existed until 1993, and during another restructuring, it was closed. Currently, Zvonikov heads the Psychophysiology Laboratory at the Moscow Humanitarian University and conducts research on the possibilities of bioinformational action and remote influence. Security Service of the President of the Russian Federation. As a result of the transformations in 1991 from among the special services, based on the 9th Directorate of the KGB, which was responsible for the security of the country's top officials, the main Security Directorate was created, which was divided into the Presidential Security Service and the Federal Protective Service. Major General Ratnikov was appointed as the first deputy chief. It was thanks to him that a group of specialists in unconventional technologies for security and intelligence appeared in this organization. Ratnikov describes the area of interest for the security service's parapsychologists as follows. Psychotronics is the science of the mechanisms of informational connections, regulation, and control of a person's psyche, physiology, and energy. While independently studying this class of threats, I also involuntarily developed an operational interest in magic and extrasensory influence on people. I realized what insidious consequences such remote influences on a person's body can have, especially for those making important and fateful decisions. In this regard, we were faced with the question of how to protect the Russian leadership from such influences. When creating divisions for unconventional technologies, Ratnikov chose the KGB expert on phenomenal abilities, Major General Rogozin, and invited him to work as a consultant. It was Rogozin who, in 1992, became the direct organizer of the group engaged in parapsychology, extrasensory perception, and astrology, in the position of First Deputy of the Security Service of the President of the Russian Federation, where he oversaw operational activities and special assignments. In addition to reading information from photographs or internal images of the political opposition and the leadership of a potential adversary, Rogozin's experts developed a method for entering altered states of consciousness, as well as exploring the past and the future. Specialists mastering proscopy in Rogozin's service were called sleepers. They were specially trained, and experiments were conducted with immersion into the flow of time. After cross-checking with operational data, the information was reported directly to the country's leadership. According to Ratnikov, as a result, a whole list of virtual dialogues with the leaders of several Western countries was created by the efforts of psychic officers. A thorough analysis of these, verified by intelligence means, helped eliminate several dozen real threats. Rogozinski's officers studied methods of influencing people from the arsenal of Indians, Mayans, Aztecs, and priests in voodoo. Ratnikov wrote, "Academic science is very orthodox. It tries to explain all this from the standpoint of a materialistic world, constantly excluding the idea of a higher origin. Everything that doesn't fit into the established system is declared illegal." That's why my attitude toward psychotechnologies was rather ironic at first. I considered them something like spiritualism, charlatanism, but gradually my horizons broadened, and I realized that these are very ancient techniques, ancient sciences. But by mastering such techniques or initiations, our ancestors undermined the authority of the Church, primarily the Christian Church, which believed that only representatives of the religious cult should possess these secrets. By no means ordinary people. The information obtained through extrasensory means was used for political purposes. So, according to Ratnikov, at the end of '92, the security service prevented the president's visit to Japan. The psychic operator reported that there was a high probability that the president would hand over the Kuril Islands to Japan. After that, China will make claims to Russia for its disputed territories, and everything will end in a military conflict. During the presidential elections in 1996, Rogozin participated in the work of Yeltsin's campaign headquarters. Rogozin's team calculated the most favorable moments for political actions and the candidates' meetings. The day after the second round of the presidential elections, as a result of the confrontation within the president's team, the head of the Presidential Security Service of the Russian Federation, Lieutenant General Korzakov, was dismissed, and his team was fired along with him. Thus ended the story of the legendary Parapsychological Service of the Presidential Security. Ministry of Defense. In 1989, a civilian group of psychics approached the Minister of Defense with an initiative for cooperation. At the request of the General Staff, the topic was handed over for study to the Armament Directorate of the Ministry of Defense, headed by Army General Shabanov. In June 1989, the Directorate began preparing a report on the feasibility of using extrasensory perception in the interests of the country's defense capability and security. As a matter of urgency, the Armament Directorate created a commission to experimentally verify the abilities of people identified in the documents as possessing phenomenal abilities. Based on the results of the commission's work, the Chief of the General Staff of the Ministry of Defense, Army General Moiseyev, signed a directive to create a unit within the General Staff, 10003, responsible for carrying out work on innovative technologies, which included the topic of extrasensory perception. It was assigned the tasks of analyzing the PSI-WARRIOR programs of the United States and NATO, developing and testing methods of energy impact on the enemy, selecting people with extraordinary abilities, and studying psychotechnics in Asian, South American, European, African, Siberian, and Tibetan cultures. The legal part was formalized as an expert analytical department under the General Staff. Research institutes were involved in the program, a patent search was organized, and a program for testing extrasensory abilities was launched. Colonel Savin was appointed as the head of the unit. The parapsychological program of the General Staff was supported by Finance Minister Pavlov. He helped the officers properly arrange the initial funding for the work. It was listed as a separate line in the budget and, when converted to foreign currency, amounted to $4 million a year, a colossal sum at that time. The Prime Minister set the task of creating a new elite for the country, super advisors for the government, the Central Committee of the Communist Party, and the Ministry of Defense. Military Unit 10-003 trained extrasensory groups for the Air Force, the Navy, the Academy of Missile Forces, and counterintelligence. A system was being developed to track the locations of missile-carrying submarines, remotely sense enemy military equipment, and the officers of the unit developed a method for remote monitoring of the condition of nuclear facilities. The servicemen also worked on specific requests from special services and law enforcement agencies. Most of the information about the operations of this military unit is currently classified. Savin's unit also conducted experiments that were far from military topics. In his memoirs, Savin mentions searching for evidence of the existence of reincarnation. In June 1990, our specialists, with the help of KGB officers, tested about 100 volunteers, from whom they selected around 20 people who were highly susceptible to hypnosis. Then, during the experiments, these people were put into hypnosis in the presence of doctors, and they were asked to tell and, if possible, write down who they were in a previous incarnation, in which country, city, or village they lived, to indicate house numbers or describe them, and to remember their names and surnames from that time. The collected materials were analyzed and then sent to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Trade Mission, and Intelligence with a request to verify the accuracy of this information. The assumptions were confirmed. More than 10 people provided correct personal information and accurately described the houses and areas where they supposedly lived. In previous centuries, deception was almost impossible because the questionnaires were carefully thought out, and the biographies of the subjects were studied by the all-powerful KGB. The topic of reincarnation is very interesting in general, and on our channel, we have covered it as part of the phenomenon of children who sometimes still remember their past lives and describe them in detail. We have not just one, but several episodes about this, featuring fascinating stories, including those sent in by you, dear viewers. We highly recommend watching them if you haven't seen them yet, and reading the fascinating comments on them, which are impossible to fake. The links will be in the description. But let's get back to psychics in law enforcement agencies. In 1997, Savin's department was transformed into a directorate, increasing the staff from 25 to 50 people. Savin himself was awarded the rank of Lieutenant General S. Military astrologers worked with Military Unit 10-003. The public first learned about their existence on December 26, 1997, during the broadcast of the NTV program Hero of the Day. Captain First Rank Buzanov appeared on the program, introduced by journalists as the official astrologer of the Ministry of Defense. Interest in his service grew when Buzanov announced that he knew who would become the next president of Russia. A sealed envelope was kept in the safe of the Komsomolskaya Pravda newspaper editorial office, where, after being opened in 1999, prediction number 1 was read. Ahead of schedule. 1952 year of birth, from the 1st to the 15th of October, 3 UN. September 97th year. September 97th year. Vladimir Vladimirovich became the successor of Boris Nikolaevich Yeltsin ahead of schedule. Putin, born on October 7th, 1952. The Special Laboratory for Space and Astro Forecasts at the St. Petersburg Research Institute of the Russian Ministry of Defense, headed by Buzanov, was established in April 1994. The creator of the laboratory had been a research associate at the Naval Research Institute since 1991. The methodological basis for forecasting was the lectures of the American astrologer Jacob Schwartz, who combined the ancient science with cartography. Military astrologers were engaged in developing methods for predicting armed conflicts, plane crashes, shipwrecks, and natural disasters. Every 3 months, The forecasts were delivered to Saban's staff and used in operational reports and analytical briefings for the leadership of the Ministry of Defense and the government. After the report by the Commission for Combating Pseudoscience and Falsification of Scientific Research on March 16, 1999, part of which was devoted to military astrologers, the General Staff decided to disband the Cosmo-Astro Forecast Laboratory, and Buzanov was sent into retirement. Based on the results of 5 years of work by the team in the laboratory, Buzanov defended his candidate's dissertation on the topic, a methodology for predicting accidents based on rhythm-setting cosmic factors. In December 2004, Military Unit 10003 ceased to exist. By that time, not only the military, but also a wide audience of mass media publications knew about its existence. December 2004 can be considered the official end of the large experiment to create supernatural institutions within the security agencies. The parapsychological troops existed for about 15 years, outlasting a similar program of the United States Department of Defense by 9 years, which ran from 1972 to 1995. The Americans' attempts to develop methods of controlling the human psyche began in 1945, with programs that used Nazi specialists in brainwashing. Almost 50 years ago, in 1977, at the request of the United States Senate Church Committee, a cache of 20,000 documents related to Project MKUltra was seized. This led to Senate hearings later that same year. Among the most horrifying revelations was a 25-year history of secret experiments with mind-altering drugs, mass psychological manipulation, North Korean-style brainwashing, and the use of torture. Journalists uncovered how the CIA and related intelligence agencies began large-scale experiments with the hallucinogen lysergic acid diethylamide, 25 exploring its potential uses for social control. The experiments were conducted in more than 80 universities and contributed to the spread of lysergic acid diethylamide culture. Thousands of students were used as guinea pigs, and these guinea pigs later learned to synthesize drugs on their own. Starting from 1962, the National Defense Research Institute at the Research and Development Corporation, located in Santa Monica, began a 4-year program of research and experiments using drug-induced psychosis from lysergic acid diethylamide mescaline and marijuana as a tool for psychiatric diagnosis. Lysergic acid diethylamide, 25, was synthesized in 1943 by the chemist Albert Hofmann, who worked at the Swiss pharmaceutical company Sandoz. At that time, the company was owned by the wealthy Bilderberg Club member Zygmunt George Warburg. Sandoz continues to operate as usual to this day, producing pharmaceutical products for 140 countries around the world. The MKUltra project was divided into a total of 149 sub-projects, many of which were related to research on topics such as behavior modification, hypnosis, drug effects, psychotherapy, truth serum, pathogens, and toxins in human tissues. There were also official psychics in America, for example, Joseph McMoneagle, who was given a satellite photograph of the roof of a shipyard in Severodvinsk in a sealed envelope. Tuning in to an object unknown to him, the psychic wrote a report of about 150 pages with drawings, confidently describing the distinctive features of what was then the new and largest submarine in the world, the Akula. In general, the American Psy-War program is a topic for a separate episode. Let us know with likes and comments if you're interested in it, and if so, we'll get to work on it. One way or another, the most unexpected result of the confrontation between Russian and American parapsychologists was their cooperation after the official organizations were dissolved. Veterans of the Psy-Wars joined forces to share their experiences and wrote a unique documentary report on the use of extrasensory perception for military purposes. Psy-Wars, West and East, History in Eyewitness Testimonies. It was released in 2015 simultaneously in Russia in Russian and in the United States in English. It is obvious that the chronicle of the use of parapsychology in government agencies is incomplete. The likelihood that CSI programs currently exist in classified departments is more than high. And despite the fact that there is no official information about the existence of official parapsychological structures in government bodies, it is unlikely that interest in the psychophysical abilities of humans will be completely replaced by the rapidly growing technological capabilities, which amaze us every day with advances in robotics and artificial intelligence. However, there is something else that is very important in this matter: each of our personal experiences. Under this episode, you can find an amazing collection of your personal stories. It's very interesting, because there's no point in making up and writing about cases in the comments that never happened. You describe your paranormal experiences and your stories that don't fit into conventional boundaries. Give this film a fair rating, and welcome to the reading room with comments. After all, some of these personal revelations might be even more interesting to you than the film itself. See you soon.